You are listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast produced by Veteran Strategies and featuring conversations with fascinating and impactful men and women who have shaped our world, our communities, and our history. My name is Robert Vane, Principal of Veteran Strategies, and your host for our discussion. You are listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies, a local veteran public relations enterprise, and sponsored by Girl Scouts of Central Indiana, Garmon Construction, Leaders and Legends LLC, the Grand Hall and Conference Center at Historic Union Station, the McGinley's Golden Ace Inn, and McAllister Machinery, your friendly neighborhood Caterpillar dealer. You may find all your sales and rental equipment needs at McAllister.com. We're pleased to announce our podcast is now a member of the All Indiana Podcast Network in partnership with Wish TV. You may find Leaders and Legends at allindianapodcastnetwork.com. Thinking of starting a podcast or need to host a public meeting? Let Leaders and Legends LLC be your partner as you look for new ways to communicate your message. Please contact Chris Spangle and me at leadersandlegends.net. Thank you for joining us on the Leaders and Legends podcast. Our guest today is John Thompson. He is many things, that's for sure, but he is now the new chairman of the Indiana Chamber of Commerce Board of Directors. Mr. Thompson, it's nice to see you. How are you?
I'm doing great. Things are going very well.
Thank you for coming on the podcast. Congratulations on your latest appointment. Talk to us, please, before we want to talk about your career and how you came here from Baltimore. And did you grow up loving the Baltimore Colts, and now you love the Indianapolis Colts? We got a lot to talk about, but I definitely want to start with your new position, because it's certainly one with a lot of honor and a lot of influence.
Well, I've been on the Indiana Chamber Board about 5 years now. And, and then I've been on the executive committee for 3 years. And I'll tell you, the Indiana Chamber, the focus is economic development, creating a better business environment, but not for the end point of having a better business environment. A better business environment is better for everyone. It creates an environment where you attract, retain, and create high value jobs, fast growing companies, high paying jobs, high paying career opportunities for advancement. So one of my key focuses in life has been economic development. And I think the Indiana Chamber is certainly the pinnacle of that.
It's both an honor, I would assume, and perhaps, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, of course, but maybe perhaps a bit dismaying to hear first African-American chairman of the board. What does that designation, that history mean to you? But on the flip side, what will it mean to you when you were no longer the first African-American chairman?
In 2022, it's always, and I guess I became chairman in 2021, very end of 2021. You're a little disheartened when you hear things like you're the first African American, in a position at this particular time, because generally that's happened by now. I will say in this case, I don't think there was an effort on anyone's part, certainly in recent years, to prevent an African American from becoming chairman or coming on the board or becoming part of a member of the executive committee or senior officer or chairman. So when I came onto the board with my background of leadership in organizations like this, I have a lot of experience leading organizations. So I think that was certainly a part of it. And then the other part, economic development is, so important to me that I'm involved in so many organizations that the fit and the synergies with those organizations is a key part of it as well.
I would hate to be your executive assistant to try to figure out your calendar. How much of a mess is your calendar as you try to balance all these philanthropic and civic responsibilities while also being CEO of 4 companies?
It's funny. I had an executive assistant at Mays Chemical. I didn't really use her as an executive assistant. She served more in that role for my staff because technology is my executive assistant. Now, many people would say, well, John, you don't have one, but you need one. Well, I do get a lot of help from my staff in terms of when I need it. They're there to help. And my wife, who's been with me, in accounting and administration in several of my companies, has always been a help too. Although she's retired, I won't let her completely retire. So I get help there. But basically, I use technology to manage it. So it's kind of like when you and I were scheduling this, I just pulled it up on my calendar. It does get to be a challenge when you're trying to juggle and set up all the meetings for the next year. But, I insist that if I'm on the board, someone send me all the invitations and I accept all of them and then go through the calendar and manage the overlaps as opposed to, doing that on the front end. So there are a number of things that I do, but technology is a big help. It's kind of like we used to have someone type a letter for us. But today you go in and, the Word software manages all of that for you. The header, the footer, the margin, the tabs. It's all there. Excel, PowerPoint. These are all very user-friendly tools. So you can manage a lot on your own. Google Meet. I can set up a Zoom or a Google Meet in 10 seconds. It's all user-friendly. And I've never gone through any directions, Robert. I just kind of get on there and use it.
Well, we're talking about Indy Chamber, Central Indiana Corporate Partnership, the Indiana Economic Development Corporation, the Greater Indianapolis Progress Committee, the Eskenazi Health Foundation, Riley Children's Hospital Foundation, along with the Indiana Chamber of Commerce. I know I left a few out. Very, very few people. I really think you're in the Jim Morris, P.E. McAllister, Yvonne Shaheen class of and so many others we could name of people who give of themselves to Indianapolis and to these organizations. How do you decide whether to accept the invite to be a part of the board or be involved somehow? It's got to be a tough balancing act. And at some point, you can't say yes to everything and everybody.
For me, Robert, it's, I grew up in that old 1960, 70 era of health, education, and welfare. And so those are kind of the pillars that I subscribe to. So I'll deal with them in order. You mentioned Eskenazi Health Foundation, Riley Children's Foundation. Now I've been more and more involved in IU Health Foundation. And I'm still involved in Eskenazi and supportive of Riley. I went off the board after 10 years, but still very supportive. So from a health standpoint, I believe in health equity. And so, those organizations, if you look at Eskenazi or Riley, they're providing health care to groups regardless of what resources those groups bring to the table. So with Eskenazi, they're serving the broader community, the least, the lonely, the left out, whomever have a healthcare need, they're there. And they're there with excellent healthcare. So excellent, that's where I get my primary care at Eskenazi. Be there on Monday morning for an appointment. And that's at one of the clinics. So I believe the healthcare is great at Eskenazi. They've built a world-class hospital, I'd say the best in the country for serving underserved communities. And then when I look at Riley, if a kid need $1 million of healthcare and their family have no way of paying it, they don't have the healthcare coverage to pay it, Riley's going to make it happen, and that's unique in healthcare. And we have kids that come to Riley that need $1 million kind of therapies, whether it's surgery, the pre-treatment and the post-treatment, and we do it often. And so that's the health part. The education part, is giving, whether it's to organizations that support pre-K, K through 12, so if you look at a United Way and the kind of work that they do, giving more dollars there than board service, but, helping there. Both my universities that educated me, I was a poor inner city kid, didn't have a dime to pay for education. And both Cornell and Columbia provided me with scholarships that basically I didn't need any student loans whatsoever. Just the scholarships covered everything. So I give back significantly there. And Columbia, I'm also on that the business school board where I received my MBA. And that MBA made such a difference in my life, just like Cornell's education made a big difference. And so, I work and donate time and treasure there, time, talent, and treasure to make sure others have similar opportunities that I had. And then the economic development is the welfare piece, because my welfare is working to enable everyone to live the American dream through career and through job development, skill development, job development, career, enhancement. So, if you mentioned the Indy Chamber, I chaired that 9 years ago, and I serve on the board of Central Indiana Corporate Partnership. But in every case, those organizations, along with the Indiana Chamber, is working, and certainly the IEDC, the Indiana Economic Development Corporation, that's their number one charter, mission, value proposition is attracting, retaining, creating, and growing businesses that can pay increasingly higher paying jobs, increasingly, and a career where you can continue to grow, into a livable wage and beyond. So that's kind of how I make my decisions. Education's a funny thing. I'm an art collector. I believe that art and culture is a key part of education and human development also. And so, I encourage and try to create work to support art institutions that support the broader community.
So when you get together with previous Leaders and Legends podcast guest, Brad Chambers, Secretary of Commerce, President of the IEDC. How much economic development do you discuss, and how much art do you discuss?
Well, I was with Secretary Chambers on Tuesday. The meeting was around economic development, but he and I at the end kind of huddled in the corner and discussed for 10 minutes our recent art acquisitions, complete with photos on the cell phone. Art Miami Basel, both he and I were too busy to attend, but we had people down there that was making selections for us. And I think he was able to acquire works there, and so was I.
You mentioned also at the beginning of your previous answer about serving on boards and dropping off. Obviously, when you came to Indianapolis to work at Mays Chemical, you weren't sitting on any boards, and you worked your way up to that honor, that level. But how important is it for folks like you, successful, respected, involved, to drop off boards and allow the next generation to take your place?
Well, see, I'm glad you raised that question. This is a community of 2 million people. And, 2 heads are better than 1, 3 is better than 2, and 4 is better than 3. And then also fresh thoughts and fresh minds. You come onto a board with a set of ideas, and then you interact with others, and those ideas are shaped and molded. Consensus are built kind of around a collection of ideas. After 9 years, in some cases 6, you've served enough. Give someone else a chance to come on. You have 2 million people in this community. There are many other great leaders out of that 2 million, and in many cases, younger leaders that can come on with, different approaches, different thoughts, and emphasize different things. And so I believe you want to constantly freshen it up. So I try not to go back onto a board. We have, mandatory limits. Generally, some cases is 6 and others is 9. You set off a year and then come back on. And I've only come back on in one case, and I'll only do it if I think, well, obviously they have to think there's a need, but then I have to think there's a need too. And if there's not a need for me to come back on, I won't.
May I ask who or what is that one case?
Well, in that one case, it was Eskenazi. And I had been around through a major transition of Eskenazi Health Foundation and Hospital. And I went off after my mandatory 9. And so they wanted me to come back on as board chair. And it made sense for me to come back on as board chair, given that I was there from almost the beginning. Eskenazi's foundation was very small and limited. Say, if you go back 20 years, even more recent than that, 17 years, I'll say. If you go back 18 years, it was very limited. And, a group of leaders came together and took it to a much higher level and accomplished quite a bit by doing it. Not just for us here, but a roadmap for other hospitals, city, county hospitals like Eskenazi around the country. And so I was there from the beginning of that. And so after we built the hospital and all of that, and we're going to another level now, it made sense for me to come back on and serve as chair for 2 years to bridge that gap between the beginning and the new generation of leaders that have taken over after me. Very capable leaders like John Ackerman was my vice chair and became chair after me. And then now Bill McCarthy is chair. And so, but neither of them was there at the beginning of the transformation of Eskenazi Hospital or Foundation.
You are listening to the Leaders and Legends podcast. Our guest is John Thompson, an Indianapolis businessman and a friend. He is the new chairman of the Indiana Chamber of Commerce. He is also the chairman and CEO of 4 businesses, including Thompson Distribution and Beyond Countertops. He's a member of several boards and commissions. When you came to Indianapolis, because I want to talk a little bit about your background, my understanding from doing some research is you just kind of, I hate to say cold called Mr. Bill Mays, but is that kind of how it happened? You just took a flyer?
It's totally how it happened. We didn't have fax machines back then. That was 1983. In the August, every Tuesday in the Wall Street Journal back in the 80s, they had a small business section. In the marketplace section, that center section of the journal. And they had a cover article on a fast-growing, minority-owned chemical distributor in Indianapolis. And when I came out of engineering school, I went straight into sales in the New England area, based out of, well, my office was New York, but I worked out of my home, out of the Boston area. And up there are smaller manufacturers, except in pulp and paper. Other than that, at that time, they were predominantly smaller manufacturers. And so we supplied our chemicals through distributors. They weren't large enough to supply on a direct basis, except the pulp and paper industry. So we supplied them through distributors. And so I called on a number of chemical distributors and got to know them well and their businesses. And so, I made a decision at that time. I made a decision at an early age that I would be an entrepreneur. But I made a decision at that time, right out of undergrad school, that my business would be a chemical distributorship. So after I got my MBA and I had spent 3 years at McKinsey, I was in that third year, and I left McKinsey and worked with a consulting firm. I had my own independent consulting firm working with large corporations as they were building their minority business development programs. So I had found Mays Chemical via that. They were in the database, but I couldn't tell a lot about the company. But in that Wall Street Journal article, it really gave me a great view into Mays Chemical and Bill Mays and his background. And so from there, I could see that Mays Chemical was a really good company with a lot of potential. So we didn't have fax machines then, nor cell phones. A buddy of mine, Rich Vinegar from Equico Capital, he called me. He said, "Hey, John, you want to start a chemical distributorship? Man, I found one out in Indianapolis. Let's meet, have lunch. I'll give you a copy of this article." And he did that. And I got the article, left lunch, went back to my office and called Bill Mays. And, Bill almost didn't take the call because it was coming from New York City. And he's like, "Oh, that's some stockbroker trying to get me to open an account." But for some reason, he took the call. And from there, we talked, and I flew out a month or two later, and we decided there was a really, really strong fit, which there was. Very, very strong fit.
And so what year was that?
Huh?
What year was that?
That was 1983. And by the time I moved out here, it was February 5th, 1984. So in 1 week, it'll be my 38th anniversary.
And you were so powerful and so influential and had so much juice that the Baltimore Colts decided to follow you out here to Indianapolis.
6 weeks later, Dave Frick tries to argue that he brought him here, but I told Dave, I said, Dave, I have statistical data on my side. So clearly I brought him here. 6 weeks after I got here, and that was always my team from the day I was born. 6 weeks after I got here, the Colts, moved out here. In all seriousness, it was coincidence, but the Colts have been my team from cradle to now. When I came home from Johns Hopkins Hospital, that's where I was born. When I came home, my crib was draped in blue and white. I mean, it goes back. Johnny Unitas got to Baltimore in 1954, the year I was born. That's when he got there. And I've been a Colt fan all that time. Even in New York City, I became a Knick fan in New York City, but never a Colt fan. I'm never a Giant or Jet fan, because remember,
right.
Joe Namath stole the Super Bowl from us in
Super Bowl
Baltimore.
III.
So I hated the Jets. And so I was always a Colt fan. And when I got here and saw that they were moving out here, I was really happy. In fact, Robert, I called my mother. I said, Mom, these people out here in Indiana, their elevator don't reach the top floor. They built this big, beautiful stadium, but they don't have a team. Ha, ha, ha. I called her back 2 or 3 weeks later. Mom, their elevator reached the top floor. They have a team. It's your team. She said, that's not funny.
Could you mean as it was happening? Because we've had David Frick on the podcast, and he's talked about how it happened. We've also had Colts COO Pete Ward on the podcast, who's to those two men right there are as good as it gets. Right. Absolutely amazing. But as it was happening, were you like, I simply can't believe it? Like, what are the odds that would have happened?
I mean, of all the teams, my home team, and I love the Colts, man, always have. So I was very happy. But of course, I had nothing to do with it. I didn't know Dave Frick or Pete Ward at that time. They're both good friends now. Although Pete was there in Baltimore,
that's
and
right.
My high school was across the street from Memorial Stadium. And, in fact, it's the oldest high school rivalry in the country. And we still today play a rival high school, Poly, 10 o'clock every Thanksgiving morning, the City Poly game. And the rivalry go back to 1875. And the game, playing the football game, goes back to 1913 or something like that. Back when the helmets were just flat little pieces of leather, concussion machines,
Have you had a chance to tell this story or laugh about this with Mr. Jim Irsay?
I haven't with Jim, but I have with Pete Ward many times. Pete's a good friend, and I've shared it with Pete many, many times. And Pete know it well because Pete spent years in Baltimore, so he was very familiar with it.
Mayor Greg Ballard's favorite team growing up was also the Baltimore Colts. And his hero player was Raymond Berry. And Raymond Berry showed up at an Indianapolis Colts game one time, and Mayor Ballard got to get his picture taken with him. And I was like, now that's some irony right there.
It is. Now, Raymond Berry, that was some receiver. Absolutely. He was one of our star players. My favorite was always Johnny Unitas. I still today compare quarterbacks to Johnny Unitas, man.
There's something to be said. Obviously, Tom Brady has his 7 Super Bowls. But there's an argument to be made, and I'm going to let you make it because you can make it better than I can, that Johnny Unitas is the greatest quarterback in the history of the NFL. And the argument is their victory, is it 1958, over the New York Giants, ushered in the era of televised professional football beyond just watching the game, and they made it a phenomenon. And Johnny Unitas was the first star quarterback of the TV age. And TV has changed football and made it what is really America's not pastime, but America's passion.
Right. That's a good point. That's a great point. And I'll tell you, I was a kid right there in Baltimore, but, kids all over the country felt the same way about Johnny Unitas. I mean, he was all of our favorite quarterback. But, the Colts had many, many good players, and a great history. The franchise, has a great history. And so having it here now, and all the success that the Colts have had here in Indianapolis, and the love that most of the state have for the team. It's, I really enjoy it. And I say most of the state, nothing negative, but the Chicago area folks, a lot of them go with the Bears, and the Indiana folks who live around Cincinnati go with the Bengals, and, but most of the state, I believe, go with the Colts.
Did you get yourself a pair of Unitas black high tops?
I didn't. I did not.
That was 90% of what made him cool.
Now, I'd gotten enamored with Peyton Manning when he was our quarterback. And so I was happy to have another era of great, quarterbacks. And then the Colts have had all those great receivers too, that, Mayor Ballard mentioned going way back Raymond Berry. But if you look at today, Reggie Wayne, T.Y. Hilton, Harrison, we've had some really great receivers to make a big difference and keep the franchise moving, as well as, overall well-rounded team.
You are listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies, a local veteran public relations enterprise, and sponsored by Girl Scouts of Central Indiana, Garmong Construction, Leaders and Legends LLC, the Grand Hall and Conference Center at Historic Union Station, the McGinley's Golden Ace Inn, and McAllister Machinery, your friendly neighborhood Caterpillar dealer. We are talking with John Thompson, Indianapolis businessman who was recently named chairman of the Indiana Chamber of Commerce Board of Directors. John, is there a Hoosier leader and or legend you particularly admire?
Well, if you look at philanthropy, philanthropy's taught. And, I really learned to give back from Bill Mays. In fact, I used to be very critical of Bill. I was out here in Indy, and I was very focused on Mays Chemicals business. And so I was always pulling Bill to be focused on the business. We need to go visit these customers and suppliers. Come on, they want to see the CEO. And Bill's like, well, John, I got this board meeting and that board meeting. I'm like, man, leave that stuff alone. We have to go make money, And Bill's like, well, John, let me tell you what all of this means and why. And, and the next thing I know, I kind of started doing it. Sam Odell would say, Bill, John need to serve on boards too. And I would say, no, man, I'm too busy. And then Sam would say, yeah. I say, and Bill does the boards and I take care of the company. And Sam would say, yeah, that's not enough. You got to do boards too. So I served on junior achievement of Central Indiana. That was my first board here. And I became chairman later and chaired. That was my first chairmanship too. And so something like junior achievement of Central Indiana for me comes under education. So that's a mentoring type organization that's mentoring and educating young people. And I was in junior achievement when I was 13, 14 years old, making and selling hangers, building a company around clothes hangers. Something like the Boy Scouts is also comes under education and mentorship. But to get back to the question, certainly Bill Mays with his leadership and guidance in terms of philanthropy, both time, talent, and treasure. And then, guys like Jim Morris. Jim's had a major influence on me in terms of giving back to the community. And, Jim's focus has been more statewide, and I'm a statewide guy. I'm not just Indianapolis. My focus is across the state. I do things outside of the state, but I mean, my real core focus is across the state. So Jim would certainly be another guy. Mitch Daniels had a major influence on me. And from a economic development standpoint that benefits everyone, how you make it work to really benefit everyone. I give a lot of credit to Mitch Daniels there. And then there are others like here and there. I mentioned Sam Odell because Sam encouraged me to serve on boards too and give back, in service too, not just, rely on Bill Mays to do it in a team approach. And I think that was key. And then there are many others here and there that have had an impact, and influence. Mickey Maurer would certainly be one. When I was buying my first company, I called Mickey, and 2 days later I was approved for a loan, and I think that was key, that access to capital, that confidence in me, right out the gate. I was a charter investor in the bank. And there are many, many others. And I'm talking about those in Indiana. In my family, my grandfather, and then as a kid, and we might get to that, Pastor Hans Volkert Goebel, who was a Lutheran pastor that came to my neighborhood and opened a missionary church, missionary under the auspices of the Lutheran Church of Maryland, and really changed my life in a major, major way. I didn't know at the time that the impact would be so great, but it was a major, major transformation.
So talk about that, please, for us, just for a minute, how that faith, that direction, that foundation propelled you or helped propel you to the success you have achieved throughout your adult life.
Because of my parents and my grandfather and my grandparents, I knew I was going to college, didn't quite know how. I won't say I had a limited scope, but I was looking strictly at local schools, because of, our limited financial resources. So I figured I'd work my way through school. But Pastor Goebel, he really exposed those who got involved with his parish to an awful lot. So he formed boys and girls clubs that really traveled the country, camping out, visiting cities. We visited New York City, Detroit, Philadelphia, and then visiting colleges separately, visiting colleges, camping out in the deep, deep wilderness where you gotta, kind of scratch for everything that you need, and you're out there for a week and you don't see anybody. That's how deep in the wilderness you are. But all of that was development, human development. Not to mention, the church service and the Christian principles, but the real transformation was in bringing in folks to help kids with SAT, help prepare young folks for SAT tests, visiting colleges and expanding our horizon on colleges and majors, various careers and majors, and how to get scholarships and financial aid, how to prepare yourself for scholarships and financial aid. And so we visited dozens of colleges. I never would have dreamed of going to Cornell and Columbia without the change that he had made. And even though it was the Lutheran Church of Maryland, so a very white church with a mission in a vastly predominantly Black neighborhood, and all of the pastors that came in were white. In spite of that, really working hard to make sure that we learned Black history. So there's programs in the evening in the church where Black history is taught. And in fact, when Martin Luther King got killed in Memphis because of that strike that he went there to support.
Yeah, the sanitation workers. Mm-hmm.
Sanitation workers. He was supposed to be in Baltimore in my neighborhood. And the core of it, his visit, was with Pastor Goebel, because Pastor Goebel was that transformative. And to give you an idea of some of the other benefits we had in that neighborhood, it was a public housing project. At one time, Congressman Perrin Mitchell, before he was a congressman, managed that housing project. And so we had been exposed to good leadership, but we spent weeks preparing for Martin Luther King to come to Baltimore. And the core of his visit would have been, or certainly a big part of it, was our church, St. Augustine. And then he went to Memphis and, got killed. Not saying it wouldn't have happened in Baltimore. They may have set it up and done it there. Often those in the neighborhood say, if he'd have come to Baltimore, it wouldn't have happened. And I'm like, I don't know that that's accurate, even though I was 13 years old when it happened. Even then, I was like, it might have still happened in Baltimore too. So, but that was a major, major transformation. So at my sister's 10th grade graduation, the largest scholarship, she went to Frederick Douglass High School, so that's a Black high school.
Right.
The largest scholarship went to a kid who got a 4-year scholarship to Princeton for $17,000. And then she graduated in 1970. That's what it cost to go to Princeton for 4 years, was $17,000. And I told my mother then, I said, I'm going to get a larger scholarship. And 2 years later, when they announced mine in the Civic Center, where we graduated, it was $20,000 scholarship to Cornell. And Pastor Goebel get a lot of credit for that, a lot of credit.
How did growing up in that era, the era of sort of the modern civil rights movement of the 50s and the 60s, early 70s, continuing on through today, of course, but those core years, how did that shape your sense of patriotism and civic service?
I was a bit of a rebel then, like young kids tend to be. And I grew up in two public housing projects at the same time. I officially lived with my grandparents in Lexington Terrace, and then spent, plenty of time too with my mother and siblings in Perkins project. So I grew up in two projects at the same time, which was a real benefit to me because one was on the west side and one was on the east side. And so that gave me the run of the city where I knew people everywhere I went. And so I could travel fairly freely through the city. And my aunt lived in Cherry Hill projects. And Lexington Terrace is the home of The Wire. And the main building in The Wire is the 734 building, and that's my building. I moved in there when I was 4 years old and left to go to Cornell. And then Perkins Project, where my mother lived, that's Yaphet Kotto, homicide, life on the streets. And that was the nature of those projects. And I was no bookworm by any stretch of the imagination. Folks were shocked when I got a scholarship. They could not believe it. They had no idea that, towards my 10th, 11th, and 12th grade years, I was in the house studying. They may have been in the house watching TV, but I was in the house studying. But I was still torn between the two worlds, trouble and the right path. And whatever path I was on, I was a leader. So I always had that leadership. So, at St. Augustine, I was a leader. I was president of our boys club. And then in the streets, I was a leader. So if there was trouble, I couldn't blame it on someone else while I was following this person. They were following me. And so I was torn also down the dark path and had problems, but Pastor Goebel always came and bailed me out. Never had a problem that he couldn't get me out of. But and then as it related to civil rights and the protest, even though Martin Luther King was coming to visit my church, I was not the turn the other cheek type. So we had an organization called Black Brotherhood Association, and there were chapters in other cities, DC, Detroit. I was vice president of the Baltimore chapter, so I would go, expense account at 14, I would go to those other cities. And we were much more radical than Martin Luther King. We were not turn the other cheek. And so we thought that peaceful protest was not the way. And that's not unusual for young folks, because you tend to be idealistic and you're looking for utopia. And, so our mantra was we were much more Malcolm X than Martin Luther King. And that wasn't unusual for many inner city young Black kids.
Especially after Malcolm X's assassination, murder a few years before.
Yeah.
You mentioned two people, and they kind of came together in an interesting way about 16 years ago or so, 18 years ago, and that's Bill Mays and Mitch Daniels. Bill Mays famously endorsed Mitch Daniels' run for governor in 2004, and it caused a lot of joy on my side of the political aisle and some consternation on the other side of the political aisle. Can you speculate why Mr. Mays would have endorsed Mitch Daniels, and talk about the Daniels effect on Indiana's business climate, because a lot of the guests of the Leaders and Legends podcast, including your fellow chemical engineer, Ann Mertlow, and others, have talked about that change.
Bill's always been independent. I mean, no one's going to tell him how to think and what to say and do. He's always been independent. And I try to be that way myself. Be thoughtful, not impulsive. But then when you think it's the right thing, even though others may not share that view, you do what's right. And so, I think other African Americans came around to Bill's way of thinking. If you look at Mitch's second term, where he got many more votes in traditional Black Democratic neighborhoods and precincts, where people who would go to a booth and vote in 10 seconds were now taking 2 minutes because they had to split the ticket for Mitch Daniels. And
Mitch Daniels carried Marion County in his 2008 reelection.
Right. That to that point, you're exactly right. And so Bill really had the foresight to see what a guy with Mitch's vision for Indiana could do. So Bill was clearly right. So I think Bill's independence, I think, was really one of his strong suits. And then Mitch's, in terms of what Mitch has done for Indiana, I mean, it's just everywhere in this state. And you look at where we are today and the things that we're able to work on now because of the things that Mitch helped us fix, 17 years ago, going back to 2005, 2004, 2005 and on. Often you'll hear people talk about right to work. When we met with Jeff Immelt, GE CEO, he told us if we didn't have right to work, we would never have heard about his engine plant that he built in West Lafayette until it was publicly announced going to another state. He said that you had to have that. So if you look at all that was done to lower taxes, lower regulation, make us more cost effective, that's allowed us to become much more of a business state, and then put us on that track to AAA bond rating, where we can make investments in our state with federal dollars or with our own dollars, because we can borrow at such cheap rates. And then, balancing the budget and going on to have a $2 billion surplus that also supports that AAA bond rating, creating the IEDC, a quasi-governmental organization that had much more freedom to develop and implement economic development strategies than a wholly owned government agency could do. And then when we found even that the IEDC had limitations, like owning stock in companies, then Elevate Ventures was formed as an independent company, an independent organization, a nonprofit. So 21 fund dollars that are appropriated by the legislature come through the IEDC, but it goes to Elevate. And then Elevate can make investments. Number one, they have the people to really do the due diligence, but they can make the investments that we can then, share in ownership as citizens of Indiana with the 21 fund dollars and get a huge return. And we've had about 35 exits, profitable exits from the ventures that we've invested in. Well, all of that was birthed under Mitch Daniels. I mean, all of that. I mean, it's just totally transformative. And so when you look across the country, and it didn't just benefit Indiana, and that's a good thing, because we're all, patriots of, and citizens of the USA. So I'm happy to see that other economic development, state economic development organizations have borrowed many of those principles. And so all American citizens are benefiting to a degree. Now we have competition between the states, just like, Ohio just got that Intel chip plant. And, I'm happy for Ohio. Wish it was here, but I'm still happy for Ohio. But Ohio changed their economic development principles and shaped them much more along the lines of Mitch Daniels' vision. And so now they benefit. Now that chip plant is only 85 miles from the Indiana border. So many Indiana citizens will work at that chip plant in the coming years when it's built and developed. And those will be $35 and up an hour jobs. And so that's a good thing to see that come to the Midwest. But Elevate Ventures is always it's the top VC organization in the Great Lakes states. I mean, that all was birthed under Mitch Daniels. Now, the 21 Fund had been around pre-Mitch. It goes back to 1999. But the change in how we deploy the dollars changed under Mitch, and has made a tremendous, tremendous difference when you look at the number of companies that have been formed, grown, sold, and the investment dollars that came into Indiana being reinvested back into businesses that start here in the state.
You have a few more minutes on the Leaders and Legends podcast with CEO, philanthropist, entrepreneur, member of so many boards, we can't name them all. And that's our guest and our friend, John Thompson. As you drive around or travel around the state or the city of Indianapolis, what do you wish we were better at?
I'm very proud of the accomplishments that we've made. I think COVID has set all cities back. So the vibrancy and liveliness that had come to Indianapolis, and it's still here. I mean, I was downtown for March Madness and the football championship, and even before that, the Big Ten. I mean, it's still lively even with COVID. But so I am very pleased with the accomplishments here in Indiana, not just downtown, but throughout the 9-county region. When I look at all that's happened in Fishers and Carmel and now Hancock County, what they're doing in McCordsville, and even down in Johnson County, Greenwood's come a long way, and Hendricks County. I mean, Boone County. I mean, it's just it's 9 counties of development, and I was fortunate to chair the first regional cities, and so I had a firsthand view of the before, during, and after of what happened in those 3 regions, centered around the 11 counties around Allen County, Fort Wayne, South Bend, Mishawaka, Elkhart, and then, Evansville, Warwick, Vandenberg County. What happened there before, during, and after. And I'm telling you, those communities are totally transformed, and they're still on a heck of a trajectory. And so I'm very happy to see those 3 communities got $50 million again in the READY grant, with what I call, as an old timer, regional cities too, although it's much broader than that. And then several other regions. I mean, $500 million went into these regions. And I think it's going to be, transformative. But in terms of what else would I like to see, I want to see more new business formation. And I want to see more gazelles form. That's the really fast growing businesses with the high paying jobs. And everyone doesn't qualify for those jobs. But those kinds of businesses grow entrepreneurs because those businesses get sold. Those managers and employees share in the liquidity event. And for the most part, they stick around, reinvest, and grow more jobs. So as long as we can continue as a state to provide the right kind of workforce training, and we can train the workers so that the high-paying jobs stay here. But the core of it, we want to attract companies. We want new plants to be built here, but we want to start and grow our own businesses, fast-growing businesses with high-paying jobs. And so I want to see more of that, not just in central Indiana, but across the state. And that's going to require broadband, and we have to deploy more broadband. And sometimes it's going to look foolish because we're spending $1 million to take broadband to 200 homes. But, I don't know who one of the kids, is in the 200 homes that might make a real difference for our state, whether it's a rural area or an inner city area where they don't have enough broadband.
We've reached the point at the Leaders and Legends podcast where we ask the same 5 questions of all of our guests. Mr. John Thompson, are you ready?
Yes.
And I'm not going to ask you, has anyone called you up and said, you did a great job at Georgetown? That's not one of the questions. Number 1, what was your first job?
My first job? I was an independent entrepreneur. So at 8 years old, I sold fruits and vegetables off horses and wagons in Baltimore. It's called Arabbing, and they still do it in the inner city today.
Number 2, what was your first concert?
The Temptations.
Number 3, if
1968, The Temptations.
I wasn't going to ask you the year, but I probably would have guessed pretty close.
I was 14, so I'm telling you my age.
Number 3, if you could suggest any book for someone to read, which book would you recommend?
Oh, that's a tough one. Let's see. I'm trying to think of a book for other people because books that I read a lot, others won't read those. So I'm trying to think of books for other people. For me, it's Valuation by Tom Kohler, but most people aren't going to read that book.
Well, that's all right. Number 4.
But that's the book for me, Valuation by Tom Kohler, but that's not reading for everyone. So you go ahead. I may think of another book that might help others more broadly.
If you could witness any event in history, be there in person as it happens, which event would you choose?
Many of the events that I enjoy, I guess when the soldiers came home from World War II, that would have been something to see. I never want to be, where I'm back in 1945, but to be on Fifth Avenue when the soldiers came marching down Fifth Avenue after World War II, that'd be a sight to see.
It's a great answer. Last question. If you could have dinner with anyone living today, 2 hours off the record, discuss anything you'd like, whom would you choose?
Oh, I'm funny about those kinds of things. I always think if I want to do that, I could, maybe not 2 hours, but I could get time with them, for me, it might be Warren Buffett. But if I really want to get time with Warren Buffett, I can. He's a fellow Columbia MBA, and I'm very active with the business school. So I could make that happen. Maybe not 2 hours, but 30 minutes, I could make it happen. But I'll leave it at Warren Buffett.
You have been listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies, a local veteran public relations enterprise, and sponsored by Girl Scouts of Central Indiana, Garmon Construction, Leaders and Legends LLC, the Grand Hall and Conference Center at Historic Union Station, the McGinley's Golden Ace Inn, and McAllister Machinery, your friendly neighborhood Caterpillar dealer. Our guest today has been businessman, entrepreneur, philanthropist, and all-around wonderful human being. We've had many conversations before this podcast. They've all been delightful. I'm very, very grateful for your time and your friendship. John Thompson, please don't ever leave our city or our state. We need you.
Well, thank you, Robert, for having me. I really enjoyed talking with you and enjoying the podcast creation.
Thank you very much for listening to Leaders and Legends, brought to you by Veteran Strategies Incorporated. If you want to contact us about this program or our menu of public relations services, please send us an email at robert@veteranstrategies.com. That's robert@veteranstrategies.com.